5 minutes early just to make sure we get all the intros in the recording.
We are recording.
Awesome. So welcome to, again, how to know when you're ready for an editor. So editors can help us at every level of story development. You have developmental editors who help turn ideas into stories. Line and copy editors, maybe we're more familiar with, do feedback on portions or a full manuscript. And proofreaders will go over the final work. But editing is also sometimes very expensive if you're not working with a publishing house. And even if you are, you can save time and money and stress by taking time to ensure that you and your story are prepared before you start working with an editor. So first we're going to meet our panelists, and please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the editing process as you've worked with it. And we'll go Steffi, and then Connie, and then Natasha.
Hi, my name is Steffi Cham. I am a freelance editor and a contract editor, which means that I'm a contracted in-house editor for a few small companies. I've been working with WritePlan for a few years, and I've been freelancing for 6 years now. And I forgot the other question I was supposed to answer. My favorite part of the editing process as an editor is right after the first round of developmental edits, because that's usually where I see the most significant changes. And I've seen a lot of repeat clients and even first-time clients make the biggest progress and improvements that way. And it's really cool to just see how the story just enhances and changes, and to see how their writing improves just by leaps and bounds, even in that first round.
Awesome.
Great. So I think I'm up. So hi, I'm Connie. I am a freelance editor who primarily works with independent authors. I've been freelancing since 2013. That sounds about right. On and off, sometimes more than others. But yeah, I came to editing through my work in university writing centers. And so for me, my favorite part as an editor, my favorite part of the process is, like Steffi, that developmental stage, or the related service of book coaching, really getting to work and in that one-on-one teaching writing center style with an author is what really gets me energized. And as an author myself, it's probably, again, that's, that same stage in the process is maybe tied with getting the final proofs and knowing it's almost done.
I think, well, yes, I am next. I'm the only one left. So hello, everyone. My name is Natasha Delane. I'm a fantasy author of the Pariah Child series. I have been traditionally published, so I have experience with in-house editors at publishing houses, and now I am indie published. So I primarily work with freelance editors, and I work with several freelance editors as well. If I had to pick a favorite part of the editing process, it would be going through the line edits, only because I feel like going through the line edits is the easy part of editing as an author. The larger developmental edits take more rewriting, sometimes reorganization, where the line edits are just kind of like accept, delete, accept, and you go about your life. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, nice to meet everybody. So it sounds like you've worked with editors at multiple stages of development. So where or how do you determine which stage of editing that you want to seek professional editing eyes at? So like, how do you evaluate the goals that you have for your book and your message and your story, and decide when is the best time to get the help of an editor to accomplish those? And we'll do Connie, and then Natasha, and then Steffi.
Okay. So I think your first step, if you're considering, trying to decide what your next step is when thinking about getting an editor, what level of editing you're looking for, is to go get your work looked at by, if you don't have a writers group, now is a great time to find one. Your writers groups are cheerleaders. They are in the trenches with you, other writers who can give you critique and feedback, and that outside input will help you make that direction to know, do I really, do I need to do a big overhaul of this plot, or have I been working on this manuscript and long enough and I need more of a sentence level help.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think if money was not a factor, I would just be getting edits as I see, whenever I want, willy-nilly, whenever the mood strikes me. However, that's not the case. So I think the process for me, communicating with an editor and seeking one out has changed from my first book to the books I have now. With my first book, I actually got 2 edits, and I waited until I had finished the work myself, and then I read through it myself. So I always believe in doing a self-edit before passing it on to an editor. However, with my first book, I also did a set of beta readers and got their feedback. And then I eventually, so I was like, there's a lot of pressure with the first book. So after the beta readers and getting their feedback and everything, and going through that, I then went ahead and moved it on to an editor who focused more on not so much big developmental stuff, but the smaller line edits. And then I eventually moved on to someone who focused on the developmental edits. I did all that, and then it was published. That was for the first book. Now for the second book, for the other books, I usually only go through one round of editing, and I don't use beta readers, but I always do a self-edit, even if I have to do a self-edit 2 or 3 times.
Awesome. And Steffi?
I'm going to answer this question from 2 perspectives. So as an author, when I'm about to look for an editor, I ask myself, do I feel like I have told this story to the best of my ability right now? Because I know that once I've gone through edits, especially those first few developmental rounds, depending on budget and timing and how many I can even afford or have, I know that my ability to make the story better will improve. But at this very moment, have I done what I can, or do I still feel like there's more stuff that I need to do before I want a professional set of eyes on it? Now, as an editor, I feel that authors tend to do best when they have their books or manuscripts or ideas go through beta readers first, or their critique partners, or just anyone else that they consider a peer, because I see that they tend to know what their strengths and weaknesses are relatively. They have a big picture of maybe what they want to do with the book that they haven't done yet. And they'll maybe ask questions like, this is what I want to do with my book, and this is an area that I see lacking in it, and for some reason it's not happening. So how can I make that happen? And it's usually easier for them to, I think, just pinpoint what they want me to talk through with them first before I've even looked at any of the words that they've written. So I think that knowing when you're ready really depends on just how you feel about the book. And if you're a perfectionist, you may never feel like you've told the stories to the best of your ability. But I think you tend to know when it's ready and when you've just completed what you can.
Okay, that's awesome. So a lot of it has to do with getting as much as you can do to get the conceptual elements completely there, so that what your editor is then working with is more technical and less conceptual. Is that right?
Sorry. I don't know.
Please add something.
I was
if you
going to
have
say,
something.
Yeah, I was going to 100% agree with you because again, smaller like line edits are much easier to go through and make decisions about than bigger conceptual things. So yeah, I just want to second that. I totally agree with you on that.
So as a follow-up to this question, is there like an order that you guys tend to, or a checklist? Do you go to your writers groups first? Do you try to look through things for plot holes on your own? What order do you tend to do that in? And we'll do Natasha and then Steffi and then Connie this time.
Yeah. So for me, I always go to myself first. I think in the past, as I said before, when I did my first book, I used beta readers, and I think beta readers are very useful. But getting beta readers can be is a bit difficult. So I had my experience with beta readers, and I was like, well, that was an interesting experience. And that experience is what kind of led me to like, okay, I'm just gonna focus on my edits. Maybe I'll have like a friend or family member reading to get their general thoughts and then push it onto the editor. So my process as it works now, depending on how well the book flows, because as writers, I'm sure you know, some books, you know, the outline is there, you can get it done in a day. You can write the novel in like maybe a month because it flows so easily. And then other novels are more like pulling teeth. If a novel is more like pulling teeth, which is what usually happens, I definitely go through it like 2 or 3 times. I do focus on things like punctuation and grammar, of course, but my biggest things, and I think the fear of any writer, is missing a plot hole. So when I'm going through my book, I'm just looking for something like blaring, you know, very blatantly obvious. And then once I do that and I feel kind of confident, though I always send my editor a note like, I know this is not going to be great, but like, could you tell me, you know, and then I reach out to my editor, and they usually, the one I work with now, she usually takes like 2 to 4 weeks, so not super long. I get the edits back from her. I run through my line edits first because they're the easiest parts, and then I focus on the larger conceptual and development things. So that's how my process currently works right now.
Okay. Connie.
Yeah.
Or no, sorry, Steffi. I went out of order. My bad.
No worries. I usually have a very specific process. It's first myself, as Natasha said, I go through all my self-editing first. I just personally don't like other eyes on my manuscript until I feel like until I feel like it's not a very, very rough draft. So that always happens first, and sometimes it helps for me to just try to be objective and think of the book as if I were the editor for it and I wasn't the author. And of course, it's very hard to separate that way. So beta readers are helpful, but it also depends on whether I can recruit them in time, depending on the timeline of the publication. And so beta readers may or may not happen for some of the books. And from there, I tend to go through 1 or 2 rounds of developmental edits, depending on what the book needs, and then copy edits, and then proofreading. And I find that has worked well for me so far.
Awesome. And Connie?
So I until the last couple of books, I have outlined really, really heavily. Like I will outline, really make a fairly detailed outline, and then before I write each scene, I would micro outline my scenes. So I had a pretty good handle on structure before writing the book, which is helpful if you're trying to rapid release. So you don't want to spend too much time in those developmental stages to get books out pretty quickly. Though the more I write, the less I need that detailed outline, and I am actually, for the first time, writing a mystery. I'm not sure who did it, so we'll see how this goes. This will probably need more beta feedback than usual. But yeah, again, depending on time availability, I can get feedback from betas. I usually know by the end of the book, like, there's some holes I gotta go back and fill. There's some things I need to foreshadow, clues that need to be planted that because even the best outline, you're never going to stick to it 100%. You're going to
For
find,
sure.
yeah. Yeah, you're going to write along and you're going to go, oh, I've got a better idea, or I could combine these two scenes or something. Yeah, so there's always going to be a little bit of deviation, but after my edits and then betas, which is usually the bulk of developmental editing for me, unless I've got a really tricky project, then yeah, I see someone saying mystery is so intense, not even the author knows you've done it, which Agatha Christie did this, so
You're in
there's
good company.
precedent. Hope, but yeah. After that, then I hand it over to copy edits and go through. I always do the final proof myself, listening to it, listening to the computer read it back to me.
That's very interesting. I like that. It's very detail oriented. Okay, so it sounds like a lot of your evaluation process can also depend on the quality of the feedback you're getting from writers, from beta readers, before you even give it to an editor. And this kind of goes in line for those of you who are going to be seeking freelance editors. How do you evaluate your beta readers, your critiquers, your writing group? How do you get to find a person that can give you a level of feedback that you feel is fitting for your work? And we'll do Steffi, then Connie, then Natasha this time.
I think that if you are very lucky, then you already have a group of writers that you communicate with often, and maybe readers who are already happy to read your next work and are familiar with your work already. Those tend to be the ones who, first of all, are most willing to be one of your beta readers, and second of all, might be able to actually follow through on getting the feedback back to you. I feel that the biggest issue I've come across with seeking beta readers or critique in general from not an editor, from beta readers or critique partners or a community, is that sometimes the book goes out and nothing ever comes back. So it helps to have a sort of vetting process, talking through kind of their timeline, letting them know maybe some questions that you're hoping they might be able to answer. I find that giving structure tends to help increase the amount of responses you get back. And I tend to just put out kind of a general call and then do the vetting myself. And that has, I think, worked best for me.
Okay.
Okay. So I'd say it's the earlier you are in your writing career, the more likely you are going to need to lean more heavily on paid feedback in that developmental stage than more heavily on beta readers or a critique group, because you haven't got that expertise yet and you haven't got those connections yet with writers who can give you the feedback of the quality you need. And those connections, it takes time to develop that. But some things to look out for when you're trying to develop a critique group are the quality of the work from your critiquers, that of their own work, as well as the quality of the critiques they're giving back to you. How, not just how detailed they are in responding, but like how good their stuff is. You can, and it takes a while, to get to know somebody and to get to know a group's dynamics and whether their feedback is both resonating with you and challenging you at the appropriate level you need to be challenged at. But I do think a healthy critique group, even though it takes work to find the right balance, is really almost a necessity for an author, even if not every single piece of your work goes through that group. And it can't. Like my own group is very small. There's only 4 of us. Not everything that I write can go through, and not everything they write can go to me. But that regular critique, accountability, and having it small and intimate, and we've known each other over several years now. You know, it gives you that structure and somebody who's got your back.
It sounds like that's been very helpful for the development of your stories there.
Yeah.
Natasha.
Yeah. So first, I want to second everything that Steffi said about beta readers. That was a tough lesson I had to learn. It's easier when you already have a reader base to find beta readers. If you don't really have a reader base, it's not as easy.
A little more difficult.
Yeah, exactly. And definitely a lot of like sending the book out for feedback or chapters out and people just kind of ghosting, which happens sometimes. Going off of what Connie said, writing critique groups I think are very helpful, particularly if you're like starting off in professional writing. For me, I think I'm a part of 2 writing critique groups. One is a bit more official, one is unofficial. And I think I just found them by going to like conventions and conferences and accidentally networking with people, and they're like, by the way, you live in this area, want to join my group? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. So that's usually how those have gone down. But the groups have been they've been very helpful. The largest one I'm a part of is like 4, and the other one is about 10 people, so it's a bit larger. Anyway, going on to editors officially now. So for freelance editors, I pretty much all of the editors I work with, I found them through references by other authors who I knew. So they kind of came with like a check mark that they were good, they were golden. That being said, even if someone comes with a check mark, which is very helpful, that still doesn't mean that you will work well with them. And I don't know, I don't want to jump ahead. I don't want you to be like, what's your best and worst editing? I don't know if that's one of the questions, so I don't want to jump ahead. But I'll just end it by saying that look at a lot of freelance editors have like testimonials on their website that you can read and see, like, do you know any of the authors there? Ask your author network. I think this depends on the author, but if an author leaves a review on a freelance editor's website, maybe you could email them and also see if they could give more insight into the experience. Everyone's not going to respond. Some people will respond, but that's how I would go about it.
Yeah. Part of it's very tricky, just initially connecting with people, and I know this pandemic has made it even more difficult and pushed us all online. In that vein, do you find online support groups easier to find? Do you work with any? Are there any you can recommend? Let's go Connie, Natasha, Steffi.
So online support groups as in like online like critique groups?
Sure, or even just sort of forums, places to connect with people.
Yeah, there's a lot of great places online to connect with people, to form critique groups if you want to just ask a question about craft, about marketing, about all kinds of stuff. Like Twitter chats, like Weeknight Writers. So just kind of looking in those places. For me, the places where I find the most help in networking are Twitter chats or Facebook groups, and there are just tons out there. All you have to do is search for writers. You can search for your genre, and you will find like the most surprising niches, the most surprising tiny little groups, even devoted to like really specific questions. Like there's groups for like questions about like criminal law in writing, questions about like medical issues, so you don't like break your character's bone and fix it wrong. There's all kinds of interesting stuff out there.
Amazing. Yeah, I've definitely seen some really interesting. Some of the murder mystery support groups are very interesting. For sure.
I'm sorry.
Go on.
Yeah. So yeah, the Facebook groups definitely, because there are so many Facebook groups. Some of like Connie said, some of them are very genre specific. Some of them are more general, and some of them actually focus more on the business side of writing versus the craft of writing. But if you just go to Facebook and put like writing or author, a lot of options will pop up. The one thing I would say about Facebook groups, just like I guess moral thing is, if you're going to go in there and ask questions, make sure you also try to engage and answer some questions. So I know for me, right now I'm not as active as I used to be in several Facebook groups. So like when I start to become more active again, I'm not going to bombard them with questions. I'm going to try to just go in and like engage and answer what I can first. So it's like a little bit of even give and take, I personally feel. That's just a little thing for me. In terms of other writing groups online, obviously, as you said, a lot have already gone virtual. I'm going to guess the name here because I don't have it in front of me. I think it's called like Creepy Critters is what a fellow author called it. It's a very old website. I think if you just Google like Creepy Critters critique group or something like that, it will pop up and you have to create an account. But they do like weekly critiques where people will submit their work. One of the works is sent out to everyone to critique, and then if your work isn't sent out, it might be sent out at a later date, and then you send your feedback. But they have a whole entire thing set up. So I think it's called Creepy Critters. I'm sorry, I don't have it written in front of me right now.
That's
so,
okay. The big takeaways here are like be active, participate, look at the quality of the work, and just find a community that maybe you really niche into well. Those are all really good things to consider. Where am I? Sorry, I lost my note page. Oh. One last note on a sort of a formatting thing. Do you do anything to format your work before you're ready to send it to your editor? Do you put it do you do anything to make sure it's very internally consistent? Do you run it through any grammar checks or things like that? Just let us know what you do to prep for, I'm ready to send this file to the editor, okay? We'll go Natasha, and then Steffi, and then Connie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to start, I don't do any official formatting until the end, until like I'm completely done, until I have the final version of the edited book. I think the most formatting I would do before actually sending it to the editor and starting that process is, okay, the chapter titles are like this font and this size, and that's all the formatting I would do before sending it to the editor. But to answer the rest of your question, I think I just do like a general read through looking for punctuation, grammar. Obviously, that's very easy in Word because they have like it's set up to look for that. I also sometimes use Grammarly if I don't 100% trust Word, which sounds very weird. Don't trust the machines, everyone. Anyway, if I don't 100% trust Word, I will just go ahead and run it through Grammarly. And sometimes Grammarly does give me different results and also more detailed feedback. So I'll use that. And then once I go through that, get some feedback if I sent to a friend or a coworker or whatever, then I will go ahead and send it to the editor. So.
Okay. Steffi?
I personally also wait until the end to do official formatting, and I generally have recommended to clients that they do the same too. But I do make sure that everything is consistent. And even more so now that I think worked with more clients, and sometimes the format just gets wonky and there are indentations everywhere, and it can kind of be distracting and interfere with any other edits you're trying to do. So I make sure that it's consistent in mind first. Just very basic things, that the indentations are all in the same place. There aren't line breaks, and I can't even think of all
dialogue tags, I hear, is a thing.
Yeah, all over the place. Just making sure that they're consistent so that even if something is wrong, they'll all be wrong together, and it'll be easier to fix in the end. And I make sure that it's just industry standard 12-point, open or double space, depending on what the person I'm working with prefers. And like Natasha said, I try to go through and just make sure that some of these avoidable errors are worked out first, just because I want to make sure that everything is as non-distracting as possible, so that the content will be main focus.
Yes, that is the focus. Some things can just get in the way, little things of the clarity of things. Connie.
Yeah, Natasha and Steffi has said, I tend to leave the majority of my formatting stuff till the end, especially if you are an indie author using like a drag and drop formatter like Vellum or like the free formatter from Reedsy, then you just do your formatting in that step, and you don't do anything fancy. You just kind of keep your manuscript pretty clean. Yeah, so that's my recommendation on formatting, is do as little as possible. Now, if you're nonfiction and you've got like lots of charts and stuff, formatting is going to happen. That's and that's also something that if you have a copy editor that works with nonfiction, that they will try to keep turnover as clean a draft as they can get to the formatter. But that's a different ball game. As far as like pre-edit stuff, I do my own personal copy edit before I send it off to an editor. I'm kind of just a light copy edit. I'm gonna echo Natasha, don't trust Word. It is a machine, and it does not actually speak human language. It is just programmed to catch things that humans have put in it, and language is very complex, and rules of formal grammar and style are very complex, so it doesn't really read it.
Not to mention it misses all the homonyms and things that are properly spelled but in the wrong place, that sort of thing as well. Just gonna check the chat for a few questions. We have, okay, so what do you wish you had known before you worked with an editor for the first time? Steffi, then Connie, then Natasha. Give us your stories.
This is kind of a big question because I feel like the learning curve can be big.
Pick one thing you really wish you had known.
I think that I would wish maybe I'll answer this from a more personal perspective.
Sure, if you want.
I think that I wish I had prepared myself better to receive feedback. I think that for myself and even for many other writers, sometimes that first editorial letter back can be hard to read, because it's just, you are sending something that you spent a lot of time and effort into the eyes of someone else, and their job is to tell you, how to make it better. And if you haven't braced yourself for it, it might read more like, these are all the things that are wrong with your book. And I also wish I had known that in reading these letters and feedback, that I don't have to accept and change everything just because an editor told me to. It is a back and forth process, and you have most of the say to all of the say, depending on the type of publishing you're doing. And I think when I first started out, I was more like, I have to change everything just because someone said it. And that was partly what made it so hard to receive feedback, because I would be very attached to something that ended up being central to my story. So those are the biggest things that I wish I had known first.
Okay, good to know. Connie.
So it's hard for me to answer that because I started editing before I started publishing. So I was an editor before I
was that purposeful?
It's just the way life worked. But so I would say some of the things that I wish my clients would have known, who are first timers to editing, is the big one, I think, is to understand and study story structure. And it doesn't have to take too much time. You can just read a couple of craft books and watch some movies as follow-up, see how it works. but that is the number one kind of like big thing I wish that the client had done before coming to me, especially true of picture book writers, because picture books are deceptively short. They are short, they are not simple, and they are not easy to write. So if you are considering a short work, a work that seems really simple, like a picture book, study your story structure, understand character arcs and conflicts, and do that homework and read lots of books in your genre. Picture books is super easy too. Like, this is a great assignment to give to picture book writers. It's just because you can just sit down with a stack in an afternoon and you've read like 50 picture books and learned a ton from that. So that's the number one thing I think that I wish the client would have known before coming to me, because then they would get a much better result with less rounds of editing.
The basics are basics for a reason. Natasha.
Yeah, so definitely everything that both Connie and Steffi said. I really have to agree with Steffi a lot on the first time you get those edits back, you're a little nervous already because it's your first time publishing a book, and you're kind of like, well, they're the expert, they know better. And so you're almost inclined to just agree with everything your editor said, not realizing that edits are just suggestions. And I'm speaking more from the indie perspective than the traditional perspective right now, but edits are more just suggestions. They aren't rules. I will answer with a very short story to tell you all a lesson I learned, because as I said, I had editors when I was officially published, and then I also worked with several freelance editors. And quick story, one editor was recommended to me by an author who I knew, and I was friends with that author, and so I approached the editor and I looked at her website, and one thing I noticed immediately was that she seemed like she edited a lot of like urban fantasy and a lot of romance, which my books are more like epic fantasy, so I was kind of iffy, but my author friend she said, no, she's great. So I contacted this editor, and I did ask her, and I pointed out what I saw on her website about her editing more like romance and urban fantasy and not really doing epic fantasy and things like that, and I was nervous about it. So I tried to explain that to her and tried to see if she had more experience and everything. And in hindsight, her response wasn't great, because I think she was like kind of fibbing just a tiny bit. She's like, oh yeah, like I love fantasy, it's great. She never really answered my question, but she was recommended by an author who I trusted. And so I was like, you know what, Tasha, you're overthinking it. We have to get this book out. So I gave her my book. And then when I got the edits back, I was very, very surprised, because she read my book like it was a romance novel, even though I had specified to her. Yeah, even though I had told her, I'm sure in our email, because we had several, an editor, you go back and forth, you're emailing a lot, constant communication. And so I said, this is not a romance novel. Like, there are romance into it, romance aspects into it. Oh, I know, exactly. And she and I had a very brief, very civil, of course, discussion where I was like, I never said this was a romance novel. I specified, I believe if I look back through my emails, that this was a fantasy novel. I'm not sure where the confusion is. And she countered me I said it nicer than that. And she countered me and she said, well, if you look up books like yours who have, because it was kind of it was a retelling of the King Arthur legends.
Yeah.
And she pretty much said to me, if you look up retellings of King Arthur, they're all romance. And that was her defense. And so I just told her, okay, thank you. And I just decided, well, we learned that lesson, never going to work with her again. And I left it at that. Like I said, it was very professional, but I decided at that moment, I was like, okay, so that did not work out. So the lesson I'm trying to show there is that sometimes you go on an editor's site, and if they don't really have a significant amount of your genre as books they've edited, I would recommend not even emailing and like looking into pricing, because people need money, and they may think, I've read a few books in this genre, I can do it, and then it doesn't work out well. So if there aren't enough books of your genre on their website, just go on to someone else.
Yeah, this is where niche editors can really shine, because if you know all the ins and outs of fantasy or mystery or whatever, then you're much better equipped to deal with someone's story in that way. And your resume can show other clients that as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's a question about various avenues to find an editor and get published, and what resources you can do that. So maybe for your first time publishing, how did you decide where you wanted to publish your book? Like maybe for personal reasons or financial reasons, you went traditional or indie, and what resources you use to decide that, and also to sort of support yourself if you decided to go the indie way. Let's go Connie, Natasha, Steffi.
Okay, well, I have always been indie. I did hesitate a long time before publishing because that was like back in the beginning days of indie publishing, and I had been told if you indie publish that you would never be traditionally published, which is just blatantly not true. So if that is the reason you are hesitating on indie publishing, I mean, there's other reasons.
You can jump sides.
You can do both. You absolutely can. One does not disqualify you from the other. So yeah, that is a huge author mistake that I wish I had not made, because if I had started, back in 2009 when I was thinking about it, I would be so much further down the road. But yeah, anyways, but so I looked into the traditional publishing world for a long time, but after working as a freelance editor for about a year, I was working with a lot of indie publishing authors, and I knew an indie publishing author who was having some success through a critique group I was part of at the time. And so getting to know those authors and what they were doing, I was just like, you know what, I had stopped buying the hype that you couldn't do both, and I'm like, I'm gonna give this a shot. And then I kind of got hooked and never looked back. So yeah, for me it was just an entrepreneurial spirit kind of thing.
Awesome. Natasha.
Yeah. So I started out traditional, and then I became indie. We're talking about mistakes. Let's just go back to when I was traditional, I guess. I decided to go traditional just because it seemed like the thing. It seemed like the thing to do, basically. Like at that time, I knew there were indie authors. I knew indie publishing was a thing. But I was first published in like 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. And at that point, I don't think indie publishing was in its infancy at all, but it definitely was not like a full teenager. And maybe that's a good way to put it. I don't know. And I decided that, you know what, I'm going to go the traditional route. But what ended up happening is that I ended up querying a lot of publishing houses and agents. Most publishing houses, as I'm sure people know, they require you to have an agent. But I just couldn't. I could not get an agent for what I was trying to query them. So I decided, I'll keep querying agents. I will also query the publishing houses. And one publishing house got back to me. And this was a good experience, but also like a mistake I made. They read my work and they said, we can tell you can write, but we don't want your fantasy. We want romance. They published romance. That was their thing. And so at that time I was, I was young. You're young, you make things happen. I was young and I had the mindset of it's better to have your foot in the door, like in the industry, than to be outside still. So I decided, okay, you know what? I can write romance. What's going on? So I wrote several romance books with them, and it was like a good experience, but also kind of not a great experience in the sense that one thing I learned about traditional publishing, a myth that was demystified with me, was the idea that, if you're traditionally published, you don't have to do any marketing. So that's a lie. That's a lie. That's not how it works. You still have to.
People need to know this.
Yeah, like authors, whether you're traditionally published or indie published, you still have to do your marketing. Like the vast majority of marketing falls on the author. I think more falls on an indie author than a traditional author, but you still have to do a lot of marketing and promotion. And so after that, that kind of led me to like, you know what, I wasn't getting a lot of out of my publishing house, and we decided to separate. And I dove into researching everything that was indie publishing. And eventually, okay, I was one of those people that I was kind of like, I want to know everything before I do this because it was going to be such a financial investment. And that led me to indie publishing. If I had to speak on my experience with indie publishing, one thing I would say is that before I published my first book, I should have already been working on my second book, because publishing is a rapid industry. Readers are ravenous, and it is our job to feed them. So I think I answered your question.
Yes, definitely. Steffi.
When I first started out, I started in traditional publishing. It was partly the way it worked out and partly a conscious choice. I felt that I wanted some more guidance. So I knew that I wanted to connect with just the professionals first, and I just didn't trust myself to really find the right people to work with for indie publishing yet. I knew that I think I knew that I needed more structure, and I didn't really mind not being able to choose my own editor at first. And I don't necessarily mind now. It just depends on, it always depends on the specific project. But that was just how it worked out for me. And moving into indie, I felt that I had a little more just autonomy and control. I could specify more of like, this is what I want, and have more one-on-one just back and forth with my editor and with the publisher, and just making sure that everything that I had a say. And with traditional publishing, I didn't have as much of that. And it always just depends on the story and the book and how much you want. I think for nonfiction, I have never minded going traditional. And I feel that, just to answer the question, both have been really helpful, and you learn a lot from both, and you work with different types of editing. And so finding an editor really just depends on what suits you best. And as for finding them for indie publishing, looking through a lot of like their websites of potential publishers was really helpful. Talking to the authors that were published under them, and finding out kind of the structure of each individual small press. And if you were able to find your own editor, then looking through things like EFA, Editorial Freelancers Association, and looking through testimonials, speaking to potential editors was also very helpful. Is very helpful.
Excellent. Do you have anything that you ask them specifically when you're looking for a freelance editor? I'm thinking, do you send them like a test chapter? How do you figure out if you want to work with them?
Well, like Natasha had said earlier, I make sure that they specialize in the genre that my project is. And I also, this may not be applicable to everyone, but for me, I know that I want to work with people who really want to preserve my voice and my vision, especially for books that maybe center more on, I have a book right now that is kind of about the Asian American experience. So knowing that, I would probably want a person of color or someone who understands the experience best working on it, just because there are some things that experience can give that maybe professional experience isn't necessarily able to cover. And I just lost my train of thought, sorry.
That's okay. It really sounds like you can't really short yourself on doing research, whether you're going traditional or whether you're going indie. Do your research, find out what works for you. Don't be afraid that you can't switch boats in the middle. Yeah. Anyone have anything to add to that?
Oh, I wanted to just finish with the second part of your question. I do
Sure.
tend to send, when I'm finding my own editor, I do tend to send samples. And it's usually about a chapter depending on the length they're willing to sample, and just kind of see their feedback style, the things they look for most, and the way they present their suggestions.
Awesome. Natasha or Connie, did you want to add to that last bit of the question if you had anything to say to that?
Yeah, I just to nod and agree that samples are pretty standard for most editors to do. The only exception I would say, again, because I work with a lot of children's authors, and a lot of times the standard sample edit of like, I'll edit your first 500 words. Well, that would be an entire book. So you do need to rely more on testimonials if you are a picture book author.
Good to know. Natasha.
I guess I'll just add that for me, I think a sign of a good editor is when, and where they'll leave like a comment and they'll say something along the lines of, this may just be a me thing. So that to me show that that they're objective enough to, say like this I don't think this works and here's why, versus like, this could be very much a personal preference. I think that's a sign of a good editor.
Okay, good to know. I just wanted to revisit one of the things that Steffi talked about, getting prepared for editor feedback. So what was your experience with that? Did you, even after your first book maybe, did you do anything to prepare for feedback, to better be able to take critiques, to be better able to rework your story with the editor and work collaboratively that way? This time we'll start Connie, Steffi, Natasha.
Yeah, just kind of thinking back to after you've done this a few times, you're kind of like, I don't want to say like battle hardened, because there's always, it is always an emotional process to go through critique. But getting a critique earlier in your career, it's something that you do kind of need to emotionally prepare yourself for. And whether you're working with an editor or you're in those early stages with a critique group or beta readers, it is okay to say, I need a critique sandwich. I need to start with something positive, then do the critique, and then end on a positive note. It's okay to state your emotional needs like that when you're getting critique, or if you have a question, or even if you need to come, again, kind of circling back to critique groups. This is something I wish that writers would normalize more, is stating your emotional needs. Like, right now, I'm feeling really bad about this story. Can you tell me the good parts so that when I feel better, I can work on the bad parts? Now, that's not something that you want to do in a developmental edit stage, but this is something you can, that is a way you can prepare yourself for developmental editing. When you don't have the time for that kind of emotional bolstering, to do that with a critique group or even with a book coach.
All right. Yeah, normalizing talking about like how to take critiques and how to express our feelings and how we'd like our critiques, even though we can't get away from the negative parts of the critique, is very important. Steffi.
I definitely second everything that Connie has said so far. I think it's very important to, when you can, to make your needs known and generally try to work with people who are able to address that, and just adapt to that. I think that really speaks to what can be a good fit for you, and finding that is already part of the preparation, really just making sure that you're working with someone that you trust and who you can trust to be able to give feedback to you in a way that it's actually helpful. And I think that in preparing for feedback now, I know to tell myself first, it's not personal. It's if they say, your structure here needs a little more work, it's not your personality needs more work. It's just the book. It is their job to give their professional.
Help you tell a better story.
Yeah, exactly. And it does help, as long as you don't take it personally. So that's part of what I tell myself. The other part is that I commit to taking time, even if it's just a few hours. I commit to taking time after I read that editorial letter for the first time, or the comments, a quick scan through. I look at them and I walk away. I will not delve into the manuscript immediately and just start fixing things on the spot or as I read along. I find that if I give myself the time to really let the feedback settle in, I work better with the manuscript. I work better with my project, and I take the feedback better, especially if I have time to think about it and really say, oh, this is what they meant. Whereas I might have gotten it wrong the first time, or just reacted maybe more as an immediate, I'm going to fix this right now. And I find that the best sort of preparation has come from that, from just letting myself have that time right after I read it, because that's still part of the preparation process. You've read it, but you are going to read it again and again and probably again. And so you're preparing yourself every time you read that feedback, every time in between the work you do based on the feedback, you're preparing yourself and thinking about it and allowing yourself space to not immediately revise. And I feel like that's been the most helpful and has led to the most constructive changes I've ever been able to make to my manuscript. And so I generally advise this for clients as well. Especially with working with first-time authors, I tell them, you're about to receive so-and-so. Before you read it, you might want to just
Breathe.
take some time. For me, because authors tend to, right after they get their first letter back, it's okay to take some time and maybe even wait a week before you ever email me back and say, what did you mean by this?
And Natasha.
Yeah, so kind of in the same vein, I believe that like once you send your manuscript to the editor, like it's already, you send it off, I would not recommend like starting to work on another project between the time of you like sending your manuscript and the 2 to 4 weeks or however long it takes for your editor to get back to you. I'm to the point where like once I send my manuscript off to my editor, that time until she gets it back to me is like relaxation. I don't think about my manuscript. I don't look at it. I catch up on movies. I just like really try to relax, because I know in 2 to 4 weeks it's going to be like I'm going to have to put my editing hat on. It's going to be pretty stressful. In addition to that, I would recommend that once you get your edits back and you're taking some time, like Steffi said, and you start going through the manuscript. I know everyone doesn't do it this way, but this is what works for me. I go through the line edits first, and I think I've said that probably like 3 times now, but I go through the line edits first just because they're much easier, and they still make me feel pretty productive. So, I mean, it's true. I like it, line edits are easier, but I still feel productive. So I will sit down and I will do like an hour of just like going through line edits. And are those line edits, having the same impact that like, oh, this plot hole or like this missing scene or whatever, the larger conceptual development things, it's not having as big an impact, no. But I'm still getting portions of my manuscript done. I still feel productive. And then I just save the larger things, the developmental stuff, for later, once I've gone through all the other stuff and I feel great about myself.
Oh, so it's really good to just structure your time, know when to take a break, when to be in the space of your manuscript, and just manage your time very well. All right. I'm getting close to the end of our time, but we still have a bit more. Let's go for, tell me about your best or worst experience working with an editor, but in context with how that helped you really affect something either in your writing life or in a particular story that you were working with. And we'll start Steffi, Natasha, and end with Connie.
I think that my best experience working with an editor was when I found someone whose vision just really matched up with mine for the work that I wanted to do. And I had a lot of communication with her from the very beginning. Like, this is what I want to do with this. This is what I'm trying to achieve. And this is just the very essence of my story. And I think that we were a good fit because she was a good editor. She was good at preserving that and not trying to impose her own things on it, but also because I think the things that I needed the most improvement on, she was really good at pinpointing and suggesting ways that I could fix these things. And it was just a really good experience. I think that finding a good fit is just so important. It's everything. And finding someone who is really professional and knows how to give feedback well was just so crucial. I haven't had any really terrible experiences, and I'm really lucky that way. I will say that maybe one of the more unpleasant experiences I had was just someone really not. I think that we just were on two different frequencies, and so I would write this, and then they would be giving feedback, and I would think that that's not what I wanted to say, and they would say, "This is how you say this," and I would say, but that's not even what I was trying to convey, and that's just not it. It's just not what works for my story and my book. And I know that there are a lot of bad experiences out there, but I've been lucky so far.
So would you say finding an editor that resonates with you was the most important thing for you then?
Yeah, I think that
Okay.
there's no like best editor in the world or anything, because no matter how good an editor is and how experienced they are, they may not be the right fit for you.
It's a very subjective thing.
On your interactions with them.
Yeah. Okay, Natasha.
Yeah, so I've already told my worst my worst attitude story. So we all know about that one. I guess I'll focus on my best. So until it was like many writers, I've been writing since like you were a kid and everything, and I was never like an outliner. I was very much like a what's it called, a pantser. Yeah, that's what I used to do. But then it was my second or third novel. I decided let me try outlining, and it actually I guess part of me thought because I outlined my novel and the book like flowed so smoothly. It was honestly one of the easiest books I've written. It's never going to happen again. And when I sent it to my editor, she gave very good feedback, and she could tell that this was an improvement flow-wise to some of my previous work. That being said, she didn't just sugarcoat it and say like, "Oh yeah, this is all great. It's so good that you outlined." She was, she didn't like. She's very honest. She also said, this could be better, this could be better, and this could be better. And what I really like about the editor I work with is that she does edits in the, like many editors, she does edits in the text as well, and she also sends an email with like bullet point notes, but she also just gives like nice, big, wonderful, chunky summaries of like what she overall thought of the story. And sometimes when I get my edits back from her, if I'm not ready to do like a full dive in, what I'll do is I'll just read the summary just to get an idea of what I might have to work with. So that was probably my best editing experience.
Awesome. And Connie.
All right. Let's see. I think I've got
one is an editor and one is an author.
One is well, no, I've got. I'm trying to decide whether to start with good or with bad.
Give us the bad first, then we can end with the good.
All right. And I've got two worst that tie for worst. The worst. This is actually the worst because oh god, this experience just wrung out all of my energy. But it turned out okay. Yeah. Was an editor who said she could do a copy edit in a certain time period, and I had a pre-order scheduled, and she did not deliver.
Oh no.
Yeah.
That is not
and
good.
Then she asked for an extension, and then she said, oh, and I kept having to follow up, and I don't know what happened in her life. So I'm not going to judge, but yeah, in the end, I was like, okay, Connie, you're a copy editor. You are on a deadline. You are going to do the best job you possibly can. And I stayed up all night pulling my hair out and going like, I know there's spots I'm gonna miss, but I cannot miss this pre-order. This was, before you had any leniency on pre-orders. I was like, I'm not gonna let this mess with my career. I'm gonna get it done. So that was the worst. But that, again, that doesn't really speak to like relationships and the quality of the editing, because the editing just didn't happen. But yeah. So the second tie that actually speaks to like the quality of the feedback is, again, not an editor, but it was when I was really early in the children's book world. And full disclosure, I am actually finally feeling confident in my children's book writing enough to be pursuing indie publishing a children's book like right now.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so I am just now working on producing that, but years ago when I was first starting to study children's books, I got a critique from someone who just did not get my book at all, and the tone of what I was trying to convey. And I had a robot in the story, and she was just like, why is robots don't cry? And I was like, but I had the line like, he cried big oily tears, like, and I was like, but it's a, that like this is all a story, right? This is supposed to be fun. But she just was taking all the fun out. Robots don't really cry, and this doesn't really work like that. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's stories and magic. So that was the other one. Like, again, like somebody has to really get you. And this was another picture book writer, so I don't know, where the disconnect was, but it might just be more, again, levels of experience and who gets your story. Yeah.
It didn't really resonate on that one.
Did not resonate. Like, it did not the right person to critique a silly robot book. But and my best editing experience also comes from that time early in the children's book world, getting a critique at a Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators conference, and the critiquer looking over my manuscript, which, again, like, you write tons and tons before. I would suggest even to indie writers, write tons and tons before you ever try to publish. So this manuscript, maybe it will be revised someday, but it's not the one I'm working on. But she really took her time, and in the 30 minutes I had with her for that critique, this very newbie to the children's author space, she got me jazzed up about my story, helped me diagnose what wasn't working, and I had this phenomenal reading list of mentor texts that I could go back and look at to learn how that kind of story worked.
That's great. We are out of time, but it's been lovely talking to all of you. Thank you so much for all of your insights on how to prepare for an editor, feedback-wise, technical-wise, and for your advice on finding critique and support groups. Very important. You need to remember that. Is there anything you want to say in closing, or we can end the recording? Anybody? Okay. I guess we are completed then. We can turn off the recording.